My biological sister, like me, had her own inheritance. Then, as if by fate, her prosperity faded. The story I want to tell concerns my mother's sister. She and my mom were polar opposites. Mom worked in our grandfather's shop from the age of 12, never asked for anything, and eventually built her own business. My aunt, on the other hand, never held down a job until she was 26, stole from her parents, and was always getting into trouble. And yet our grandmother, regardless of anything, kept spoiling her and her children. The aunt had 3 children by 3 different men, and her first husband had nothing to do with any of them, if you know what I mean. Whatever the aunt or her children did, grandmother always protected them. She never had time for my mother or her children, unless she needed something from us. The only reason Mom visited grandmother was her love for grandfather. Granddad passed away in 2004, and a few months later, grandmother decided to draw up a new will. Mom and the aunt were present when it was signed, so they both knew its contents. According to the will, after grandmother's death, the house was to be sold and the proceeds split. 25% each to Mom and the aunt, with the remaining 50% divided equally among the grandchildren. At the time, the house was worth over £500,000. A decent inheritance, though not a fortune. In 2010, Mom died suddenly following an accident, without leaving a will. Since she had already closed her business and was renting, she had nothing financially. The only thing she had thought about was her own funeral. But she had described her wishes to me in detail: the music, the flowers, the color of the coffin, even the dress code for guests. She wanted people to come in bright, warm colors. When she died, the aunt and grandmother took charge of the arrangements and tried to cancel everything Mom had asked for. They were planning to play songs I knew Mom had never liked. The flowers were completely the wrong shades, and they had chosen an awful coffin. With the help of my brothers and sisters, we managed to change some things in line with Mom's wishes. But the coffin, for some reason, couldn't be changed, and grandmother refused to allow guests to wear bright clothing, so everyone came in black. It was terribly upsetting. After the funeral, grandmother altered her will. The aunt told me and my siblings she had had nothing to do with it. Grandmother claimed she had made the changes so that Mom's share would go to her children. We thought that was fair. After the funeral, grandmother seemed to stop talking about Mom altogether. At first, we thought it was grief over losing a daughter, but even 5 years after Mom's death, she kept avoiding any mention of her. If someone told a story about Mom, grandmother would pointedly change the subject, usually to how hard things were with the aunt and her worthless children. And if you tried to talk to her about your own problems, she would somehow steer it all back to the aunt. I had a nervous breakdown after Mom's death, so you can imagine how hard that was to hear. But the aunt always had it worse, of course. In 2016, grandmother passed away. She had left instructions about her funeral, and they were essentially the same choices she had made for Mom's funeral, even the music. I don't know why she had used Mom's funeral as a dress rehearsal, but it was obvious that was exactly what she had done. A couple of months later, my siblings and I were waiting for the will to be read, while the aunt kept telling me, "Oh, it'll be another whole month before we can read it." Honestly, I didn't mind. The money didn't concern me much, but my older brother was hoping to use it to pay for a honeymoon for himself and his then-fiancée. And my younger brother was just about to start university, so it would have helped him enormously. In the end, my father happened to run into the solicitor grandmother had used to draw up the will and asked what was going on. The solicitor let slip that the will had already been read and that everything had been left to the aunt. When Dad pressed him, the solicitor said the aunt had been present when the will was drafted, even though she had previously claimed she had nothing to do with it. Under pressure, the aunt denied everything at first, but eventually admitted she had been lying to all of us. She showed us the will, and it confirmed what we already knew. The house and all its contents now belonged to the aunt, including my grandfather's war medals. He had served in the Second World War. When I told her that before he died he had promised them to me, she said, "But if you don't have that in writing, you won't get anything from this house." Besides, she said, She had already given them to Clive. My heart sank. Clive was her eldest son, the very embodiment of the word loser. He cycled in and out of prison for theft and drug dealing. I knew that the moment he got grandfather's medals, they would be sold. We looked into the possibility of contesting the will, but everyone we spoke to advised us we would most likely get nowhere. The aunt immediately put the house on the market for nearly £750,000. She had angered too many people in our town, so she decided to sell up and move closer to her daughter, who lived in a large city. An offer came in on the house, and she put down a deposit on a property near the city. I thought that was the end of it. That's when karma stepped in. The people who wanted to buy grandmother's house commissioned a structural survey to identify any potential problems. And my goodness, problems were found. It turned out the ground the house was built on was too unstable for such a structure, and it was subsiding. In over 40 years of my grandparents living there, the house had sunk about 2 centimeters, but the rate of subsidence had accelerated to 1 centimeter per year. This meant that within the next 3 years, the house would need major structural work, or it would have to be demolished. The revised valuation of the house was £60,000. The buyers pulled out immediately, without even paying a deposit. The aunt could not purchase the new house, but she still had to forfeit her deposit on it. And while all this was happening, she let Clive move into the council flat she was renting. He was banned from living in council housing because he had destroyed every property he had ever been given. Someone reported this, and she was evicted from the flat. She had to move back into grandmother's old house because she had nowhere else to go. And so there she was, living in a crumbling house with her son, who was a complete arse, and her partner. She was stuck there for 2 years. Every time I ran into her, she tried to speak to me, and I simply ignored her and walked away. One day she shouted, "Your mother deserved to die for giving birth to a retard like you," right in the middle of a busy street. Someone reported her to the police. She received an official warning and became a laughingstock on Facebook. Every time I saw her after that, she looked more and more miserable. Eventually, she sold the house for around £85,000 and moved to her daughter's place in the city. After that, I lost touch with her and her children. I thought karma was done with her. But no, karma wasn't finished yet. I happened to bump into one of her old friends who told me what had happened after the aunt left our town. She had moved into her daughter's house. Let's call the daughter Sue. But they had a small 3-bedroom house and 3 children. My aunt and her partner had to share the smallest room while she looked for work and a rental. Even with £85,000, she couldn't afford to buy a house. About a month later, her partner ran off, having emptied her bank account first. She stayed at Sue's without paying a penny towards the bills, because every penny she earned went on gambling. Eventually, Sue and the aunt had a huge row, and the aunt said something along the lines of, "I should have aborted you." Sue threw her out on the spot, and once again, the aunt found herself in a city where she knew no one, with no money, and no home. The last bridge she had left had burned to the ground. The last anyone heard, she was living in a trailer in the most deprived part of town and can no longer work because she has arthritis and can barely move her hands. I know I shouldn't take pleasure in what happens to another person, but it does give me some peace of mind. And now, on to the next story. I took back the Christmas presents I had bought for the family because of their pranks. In the last couple of years, I've been earning quite well. I bought a house and still have money left over after my monthly payments. Everyone in my family has been a prankster their whole lives, and sometimes real chancers too. But on Christmas Eve, they outdid themselves. I hadn't spoken to them for years, but they talked me into reconnecting after I moved closer. I bought them all nice gifts: tablet computers with built-in DVD players for the kids, sporting goods and camping gear for my dad, brother, and uncle, antique items, jewelry, and household appliances for my mom, sister-in-law, and aunt. I brought my girlfriend along because her own relatives are awful. She was thrilled to be spending Christmas Eve with my family. Everything was going smoothly, and I had warned them, no pranks on me or my girlfriend. None whatsoever. They swore there wouldn't be any, but they couldn't help themselves. The moment we walked through the door, we were ambushed from several directions with cans of fake snow spray. The stuff stinks and gets everywhere. Somehow we survived that, but then came the gift exchange. I wasn't expecting much, but they didn't even try. I received kitchen utensils from the dollar store, a pair of spectacularly hideous holiday socks, I checked, also from the dollar store, and a pink woolly hat. And that was just from my parents. They were all giggling and filming me on their phones as I unwrapped the rubbish. One of the gifts was a wing mirror from a car I no longer own. And the only gift for my girlfriend was a can of fart spray. I told them I'd had enough, that they had agreed not to prank us. In short, these weren't just joke gifts. They were the only gifts we received. I'd had enough, so I started gathering up all the presents I had brought. They all panicked and demanded I put them back. I told them they hadn't changed one bit and they could say goodbye to all of it. We packed everything up and left, furious. The family kept calling and texting to say I was selfish, that I had no sense of humor, that they hadn't known what to get me, that the children were crying, and so on. I refused to return any of the gifts. Now, before I read the update, I'd like you to share your thoughts in the comments. Was the author in the right? Personally, I think yes, absolutely. If you genuinely don't like being pranked, that's your right. And if you were promised there would be no pranks, why on earth would they do it anyway? That alone, I think, is reason enough to simply leave without handing over any gifts at all, regardless of what the author was given in return. Update. I had previously posted about how my family treated me on Christmas Eve. When I went back to work, the story spread around the office, even though it shouldn't have. I had only told one friend over lunch, a few days after my original post. The office gossip happened to be nearby and overheard every word. Within a few days, the whole office knew, and someone there was apparently friends with my brother on social media. Long story short, my family found out about my post and were furious, calling me a spoiled crybaby who can't take a joke. I told them that 400 comments saying I was in the right suggested otherwise. They then tried to claim I hadn't told the truth. I asked them to read the post aloud over the phone and tell me exactly what was false in it. Their memories suddenly became very convenient because I had made it clear that every detail was accurate. I even still have messages from them that back up everything I said. They tried to gaslight me, but I wasn't having any of it. My mother resorted to crocodile tears and tried to guilt trip me. I told her and my father outright that they were selfish narcissists who had played favorites and had rather made me the scapegoat than face their own guilt. They had no right to lecture me or cry for sympathy when they had been complicit in making my childhood miserable. After that, I hung up. They called again and again, but I refused to answer and deleted all their voicemails. The text messages I kept. Even more relatives found out after links to my account were shared further. Some of them initially took my parents' side, but quickly switched when they saw where things were heading. My parents then tried to make my brother the new scapegoat in the situation, since that tactic had failed with me. About 2 weeks later, my parents turned up at my door trying to force me to talk to them, and I refused. I later learned that other relatives had been calling them overgrown children and saying they owed me a lifetime of apologies. My brother apparently kept insisting that what they had done was funny and refused to accept any blame. But his wife and even his own children were furious with him. The rest of the family made him delete the video he had filmed of me at Christmas. He then blamed me for ruining his best prank. In the end, his wife slapped him, called him a massive child, and told him she had never been so humiliated and ashamed to be his wife. Apparently, she hadn't known what my family had put me through as a child until the Christmas prank happened. Because before I had cut contact with the family, I had barely seen her. She then gave him an ultimatum. family therapy, and a sincere apology to me, or she would leave. My brother stubbornly refused, and his wife packed up the children and left for a few days. Then he showed up drunk at my house, yelling that it was all my fault and that I was a whining bastard who couldn't take a joke. Then he started demanding I talk to his wife and fix everything. I had to call our parents to come and collect him before I called the police. They arrived and yelled at him to shut the hell up. A few days later, our parents begged me to come over and talk. It took time before I agreed. When I arrived, my brother was there with them, looking like a whipped puppy. His wife had actually gone to consult a divorce lawyer. My brother finally understood things were serious. If he didn't admit he had been a massive arsehole, his life would be ruined. His wife had come back for the sake of keeping the children's schooling stable, but even months later, my brother was still grumbling. My brother and parents apologized and admitted they hadn't expected me to come with such generous gifts. They had assumed I probably wouldn't bring anything at all, given that I hadn't seen them in years. And they had pranked me so many times that it finally dawned on them why I had cut contact in the first place. Even though I had shown up with real gifts, they went ahead with their plan anyway, because the joke gifts were already under the tree and they somehow thought I would laugh along. They were wrong. I told them they would never have apologized like this if there had been no consequences. And on that point, they genuinely agreed and actually started tearing into themselves. Then I asked whether their previous apologies had been entirely insincere and just a ploy to lure me back into the family. They couldn't say yes or no. I'm not sure they even know themselves. After that, I had a very frank conversation with them about my childhood and about why I might never want anything to do with them again. They didn't argue with a single point I made. All the mistreatment, all the favoritism, all the scapegoating. Why? Because I was an unwanted child. I didn't ask to be born, and they had absolutely no business taking that long to realize what steaming piles of rubbish they had been. They just sat staring at the floor while I said my piece. My mother cried and blamed herself and my father, while my father started blaming her, saying it all started with her. My brother, for the first time in his life, knew when to shut up and own his mistakes. And when he finally spoke, he admitted everything. Since by the time I had made my post it was too late to return the gifts to the shops, I still had them all in my garage. In the end, I donated them to a local church for a charity sale, so all those things went to people who are not related to me. A lot of people criticized me for taking the gifts back, including from the children. But the children had also been laughing at me that day, and now they had a lesson about consequences that is good to learn while you're still young. That said, my mother somewhat undermined this by going out of her own accord and buying the kids the exact same DVD player tablets I had chosen. My father was apparently furious with her at first because she put it all on their credit card. Each tablet cost around $150, but the argument over it didn't last long. My brother and sister-in-law are attending family therapy. The incident opened my brother's eyes. Our parents raised him to be the way he is, but he had continued behaving that way well into adulthood himself. I maintain moderate contact with the family so that I can get to know my nieces and nephews, and they really are good kids. They no longer blame me for taking the presents back because they understand how angry I was at Christmas. In March, I had a birthday dinner at a local pizza place, and my family was invited. It was quite literally their last chance, and remarkably, they didn't blow it. They couldn't think of what to get me, so they gave me a large card with $100 cash inside and a written apology. We will do better. They also gave my girlfriend a pair of silver earrings as a big apology for Christmas, because up to that point, she had refused to see them in person. Not much time has passed since then, so there's not much more to add, except that things feel normal right now. No more pranks needed. They've even stopped pranking each other. The whole situation simply destroyed whatever had made pranks funny to them in the first place. Also, to everyone who previously commented or messaged me saying DVD player tablets don't exist, for goodness sake, Google it. They do exist, and the children who have them love them. The ones my mother bought for my nieces and nephews have barely left their hands since they received them. And one last thing. I reported the office gossip who had passed my story on to my brother to HR. This was one complaint in a long series of complaints about her, so she was finally given a written warning, and since then, she does her very best to avoid me at work. And the third and final story for today, they are taking things out of Mom's house. That was what I heard when I answered a call from my younger brother. For context, my stepfather Jim had liver cancer. My mother was due to have surgery on her diaphragm. The doctors estimated she would need to be hospitalized for 4 to 6 weeks. However, since Jim's life was not in immediate danger, she agreed to go ahead with the procedure. 2 days after she was discharged, barely able to move, Jim was transferred to a hospice, where he died that same night. Mother was, of course, completely devastated. Her marriage to Jim had been truly wonderful. Her first husband, my biological father, was abusive and unfaithful. Her second suffered from alcoholism and, without exaggeration, had made attempts on her life. Jim, on the other hand, was a retired master sergeant of Marine Corps artillery. He was a stern, tough, and sometimes blunt character. Mother was as liberal as they come, while Jim was her complete opposite. And yet they worked perfectly, and each of them adored the other. She had finally found a worthy man, and we all loved him very much. To make sense of what follows, it is worth mentioning that my mother had considerable means, while Jim came into the marriage with virtually nothing. A week after I published Jim's obituary, my younger brother called. He had been looking after Mother with great devotion. My brother has low to moderate functioning autism, but he showed remarkable selflessness when Mother needed help. I asked him who was taking things out of her house, but all I got back was incoherent shouting. So I took leave and went over. First, though, I called my older brother. Just in case there was a confrontation, I should say I look fairly tidy and ordinary and am unlikely to frighten anyone. I might pass for a tax inspector. My older brother, however, rides a Harley-Davidson, and it would be hard to tell whether he belongs to ZZ Top, the Hells Angels, or both. Nobody would want to run into him in a dark alley. He genuinely commands fear. When I arrived at Mother's house, I found an adult son of Jim's from a previous marriage, whose existence none of us had known about. He was loading things onto a flatbed trailer hitched to a large pickup truck. His son, a boy of about 12, was helping him. I demanded to know what the hell they thought they were doing there. At that point, his wife emerged from the house, heavy set as a cow, hitched up her sweatpants, and lumbered over to us. The long and short of it, they had rented this trailer and driven all the way from Rochester, New York, to Denver, Colorado. And come what may, they were going to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. Before I could say another word, my brother arrived, and so did the police. It was lucky my brother got there before the officers because he looked ready to kill someone. Mother had called the police, of course, since she had no idea what was going on. Apparently, my younger brother had let these people in when they introduced themselves. They had offered their condolences to Mother, and then the wife, this cow, began pointing to items throughout the house that she wanted, and her husband started carrying them out. She had developed some peculiar notion that everything in a marriage is split 50-50, even after death, and that they had simply come to collect Jim's half. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. I learned most of this story from their explanation to the police, who, fortunately, did not interfere as my brother and I unloaded everything back off the trailer and out of the pickup bed. The officers maintained professional courtesy, but it was obvious they were struggling not to roll their eyes and tell these people to get lost. "We'll be back," the cow wife shouted as they drove away empty-handed. And sure enough, they turned up the next day. Mother gave them my number and told them I was handling everything, and that if they set foot on her doorstep, she would call the police. Mother told me Jim had a small rented storage unit and that they were welcome to take whatever was in it. I gave them the address and met them there. The cow wife was furious to discover that the 5x5 storage unit contained nothing of value. As she went through Jim's things, she threw his Vietnam medals into the rubbish bin. My son took a few photo albums, and she ranted about what a waste of time the whole thing had been. Their 12-year-old son stood outside looking very embarrassed. I noticed an old Lionel train set on a shelf, still in its original box. I handed it to the boy and said, "I'm sure your grandfather would have wanted you to have this." It was probably the only genuinely valuable thing in there. They left nearly empty-handed, yelling that I hadn't heard the last of them. I retrieved the war medals from the rubbish bin. Mother later had them framed, and on that, it seemed to be over. Or so I thought. A month later, Mother received some sort of legal document from a solicitor in Rochester demanding full disclosure of assets. I passed it to our lawyer, who nearly fell off his chair laughing. It wasn't even a court document. There was no lawsuit or anything of the sort. Just a pompous letter designed to frighten Mother with some vague compliance demand. The lawyer advised us not to respond, simply to ignore it, which is exactly what we did. We never heard another peep from these idiots. One really does have to wonder how inflated a person's sense of entitlement must be for them to believe that 50% of everything in the home of their late father's wife is rightfully theirs. To clarify why none of us knew about Jim's son, my brothers and I had had no idea he existed. My mother knew, but felt it wasn't her story to tell, so she never mentioned it. Jim's son had cut ties with him completely many years ago and hadn't even allowed Jim to meet his grandson. My suspicion is that Jim may have been a strict Marine sergeant type of parent, and perhaps his son's childhood wasn't the happiest. But that was not the Jim we knew. He was the last person you would ever want to cut contact with. Mother had the son's contact details and had written to him when Jim was diagnosed with cancer and the prognosis was poor. He didn't even bother to reply to her or contact his own father. She wrote to him again after Jim's death. That is how they found out where to show up. Jim's only asset was an insurance policy, and the named beneficiary was a trust for my older brother's young son and daughter. Although Jim was not their biological grandfather, he was the only granddad they had ever known. It will be enough to help each of them in the future with their education or a first home deposit. They adored him. And my nephew dreams of one day joining the Marines to be just like Grandpa. That is all the stories for today. Thank you for listening to the end. Do check out our previous videos, which you'll find right here. And make sure you subscribe to our channel if you haven't already for some reason. Take care.